Donald Trump and Joe Biden have officially clinched their party's nominations. Not a big surprise, but according to the polling, it continues. Americans aren't too happy with either of the options. Let's go live to Washington. Aidan Smith joins me. He's a political analyst. Aidan, quite simply, you might get the base. The Trump base is rusted on. The faithful Democrats voters will definitely vote for Biden, but it's the lack of inspiration for the middle ground. It looks like these two aren't too popular with the undecideds, Aidan.
It's really interesting because I feel like it's back as 2016, back when that held the record for most unpopular nominees among the general electorate, the original Clinton versus Trump matchup. We've kind of gotten used to almost resigning ourselves, the American electorate I'm speaking for, of having nominees that are pretty polarizing and not too popular among the general public. What I think is really interesting in this case is that even despite Trump being the odds-on lock for the nomination for basically as soon as he left office, you still in polling actually see a decent chunk of Americans are still unaware that the rematch is happening. And you can even parse through social media of people actually being, especially younger people, being surprised that the matchup is going on. But yeah, to say the least, this is definitely going to probably be a battle that in the general election that independent voters are not going to feel inspired by.
Yeah, it's the independent voters, yes. It's also some traditional Democratic voters, for example, who are critical of Biden's approach to Gaza. He's got that risk that he's got to try and navigate as well.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question among either, the Biden faction of the party, so to speak, or just among the general public. It's pretty clear that Biden's approach to Gaza is a huge liability for him when it comes to shoring up the Democratic electorate, especially among young voters who tend to constitute the more progressive part of the base. A lot of people who, from my end, I saw a lot of people on the progressive side who are actually generally did not support Biden in the 2020 primary, voted for him in the general election, and ended up feeling, given legislative dynamics, happy that he was able to pass some legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act, which a lot of progressives supported because of the, green initiatives. A lot of the goodwill that was built up there among the left has definitely eroded since the war happened. A lot of people feel like Biden is giving a blank check to Netanyahu and want to see the administration put a much firmer hard line in support of negotiating a ceasefire, which makes sense given the degree of just humanitarian disaster. But I think in electoral dynamics, it's very clear that Biden's approach to Gaza is one of his biggest liabilities going into November, especially in states like Michigan, I think.
Yeah. And Congress voting to ban TikTok, how does that all play into the election year?
It's interesting because, at one level, it's something that is kind of cross-partisan in a way that most other issues aren't. In a lot of tech policy in general, this has been the case where you've seen in an otherwise really divided Washington, you've seen stuff like data privacy or antitrust, especially in the last 2 years, be a signaling cry for lawmakers from both parties. And in this case, I know that there's big news is that Trump himself has come out against the proposed legislation, which is people are surprised by given his support for it in 2020. I think in terms of the actual dynamic, because I think the general expectation, I think, is that the bill which would request ByteDance to divest TikTok, people don't think that ByteDance will actually be permitted to do so by the Chinese government, in which case the ban would go into effect. Definitely seems like a lot of young people ostensibly would be frustrated by it, just given that that's who constitutes the app's user base. Among the general electorate, I mean, we could see it could end up being popular among older people, especially who don't really use the app and see this as a economic nationalist initiative of sorts. But I do feel like, as it stands, very strange issue.
Yeah, indeed, a strange issue. And just finally, you've got, we've only got about 30 seconds left, but Donald Trump, for his part, he's got to deal with the Haley Republicans now. Will he be able to scoop them up, those votes?
I think that'll be able to scoop up a pretty significant number of it. But obviously, when you're in such a close election, you don't want any there's very little margin of error for either nominee, just given how polarized this country is in terms of electorate. So I think that will be a big challenge for the Trump campaign and big initiative in coming months.